Okay, hi everyone, welcome to week 6. Can you believe that we are nearly halfway through? Unbelievable. After this week, halfway through the course, that step closer to getting your diplomas. That's exciting. Okay, we've done a couple of heavy weeks with violent and sexual crime, so we're going to look at something a little bit lighter today. We're going to look at memory, suggestibility, and the practice of lineups. So this one is less about theory and more about practice. So let's get going. So by the end of this week, you should be able to realise that there can be cases of miscarriages of justice. It doesn't always work the way we want. Sometimes people end up in prison for crimes that they didn't commit, and there are people right now in prison that are innocent. Understand the subjectivity of human perception and human memory. The way we store and perceive our memories are quite subjective. You might remember something totally different to other family members. You might have a memory of something that happened to you, and your sibling might say, no, that happened to me, not you. So there is subjectivity involved in your memories here. You should be able to explain how eyewitness testimony is subject to suggestibility and it influences confidence of witnesses. So when you see something, you encode it into memory. Then if someone tells you something about the incident that you don't remember, you might remember that as fact, even if it didn't happen. So suggesting that something's happened can put it into your memory. This is really big with children. We're going to explain the factors that affect eyewitness testimony and identify the problems with lineups and how best to rectify them. So what is the best practice in rectifying the problem? Okay, so let's talk about justice on trial. This week's reading from the textbook is chapter 13. You need to keep in mind that the textbook is a very, very invaluable thing to have with this course because it builds on what is in the lectures every week. And there will be questions that come from the textbook and the reading, so in the textbook, so it's advised that you do read it. All right, miscarriages of justice can be identified when a court of appeal overturns a conviction. So you've got someone who's been convicted and then it is overturned. This can sometimes be due to a journalist who investigates the crime. So the Innocence Project, which is a group of people that are in just about every university now, and there's one at Griffith University. These are law students usually who go back and look through cases where the person has avowed that they are innocent, and they go back and through and look at the evidence and see if they can come up with something new that may have been missed, and quite often they do. Columbia University Law School did a study in 2002 and found the following statistics. So in the first point there, the death verdicts, these people all had capital punishment as their outcome for their conviction. So this doesn't necessarily mean that they were innocent, but that there were errors in the trial process. So we're not saying that all of them were reversed due to a wrongful conviction based on guilt or innocence, but to errors in the trial. 10% were sent back resulted in non-guilty verdicts. Again, this does not necessarily mean they are innocent, but there simply could not be enough evidence to find them guilty. So 199 murder suspects were exonerated and 125 rape suspects were exonerated. And in the rape suspects, a lot of the time they were exonerated due to DNA and the big improvement that happened in DNA in the mid-90s. Okay, I'd like to introduce you to Andrew Mallard. So this is an Australian case. So Andrew was born in the UK in 1963 and obviously moved to Australia. In 1995, he was convicted in Western Australia for the murder in 1994 of Pamela Lawrence at her Mossman shop. He was actually released in 2006, so he spent about 10 or 11 years in prison. Police covered up and changed evidence to get him convicted. He was a bit of an oddball and outcast in the community. So it was the joint efforts of a journalist, politician and team of high-profile pro bono lawyers that saw him free. Pro bono simply means that they worked for nothing. They didn't charge a fee. It was revealed that police withheld evidence from the defence. After the High Court squashed his conviction, another man, Simon Rochford, was identified as the person most likely to have committed the offence. He committed suicide in prison after being told he was a suspect. Andrew was convicted on a set of police notes that the police say show he confessed, although he never signed them. There was also a video recording of 20 minutes of his 11-hour interrogation, during which he outlined how she may have been killed. He provided a theory. Police also presented this as a confession. He had no previous convictions, no weapon was ever found, and he had no blood on him despite the scene being drenched in it. No DNA evidence was produced. When the case was reopened, a palm print belonging to Rochford was discovered to have been found on top of a glass case in the shop. This was a jewellery shop, so there was a lot of glass, and the lady who was murdered, Pamela Lawrence, had a reputation for cleanliness, and she used to clean the glass after every customer. So while they never found the weapon, they were able to identify what it was and match it to the wounds in her skull. Blue paint fragments found in her wounds matched those found in Rochford's rucksack. Rochford's appearance with a beard matched to what eyewitnesses stated much better than Mallard's appearance. The result of all of this was that 2 assistant police commissioners resigned before disciplinary action could be taken against them. The Deputy Director of Prosecution also faced disciplinary action. They were charged with unethical behaviour and withholding evidence from the defence. Andrew Mallard accepted a payment of $3.5 million. Now, I want you to keep that figure of money in mind because we're going to talk about an American case, and I would like to bring up again what Andrew got compared to what this person got down the track when we discussed that. Unfortunately, he died last year in April in 2019 in California in a hit and run accident. So tragic that happened after all that he had been through. So this little clip that I've got here for you to watch is actually just the highlight reel or the advertising reel for the documentary. I'm pretty sure you can find the documentary online or borrow it from the library if you want to. And this is just a little bit of a clip about his untimely death at quite a young age. All right, so mistaken eyewitness testimony is the major cause of false convictions. All right, what is the role of eyewitness testimony? Well, it plays a key role in criminal prosecution. If a prosecutor has an eyewitness, they'll be happy, someone to identify the offender. Courts can often rely solely on eyewitness testimony in the absence of other physical evidence. There might not be any physical evidence, but simply an eyewitness who saw the alleged offender. Jurors have been found to place more emphasis on eyewitness testimony than on any other kind of evidence. So there's something really compelling about having a person come into court and point to the alleged offender and say, they did it, that's the person there. A jury might react better to this than DNA evidence, which they might not understand, even though we know that the CSI effect has come into play in some courts with juries, where they're relying solely on the DNA evidence. Eyewitness testimony can override that if the DNA evidence gets too complex for them to understand. The confidence of the witness increases perceived reliability. So if the eyewitness is really confident about the person they're identifying, this is loved by the police and the prosecution. But confidence does not always equal accuracy, but it can make people believe that what you're saying is true if you come across as really confident. But how reliable is eyewitness testimony? Whoops. Okay, that's the one we want. So, testimony is often unreliable. Humans are fallible and will make mistakes. There is a really somewhat weak relationship between confidence and accuracy. It doesn't really equate that confidence is equal to accuracy. It's weak at best. 2/3 of wrongful convictions in the USA were due to mistaken eyewitness testimony. This is a really big number, 2/3. And despite this, the criminal justice system still values eyewitness testimony. Despite all the problems, they are still valued and believed. Okay, Elizabeth Loftus. She is the guru in eyewitness testimony. And I think this is a lady that Maesa actually knows. She did a mock jury, and the juries read a case of a case study of an armed robbery and a murder. The only differing point was whether there was an eyewitness. So Group 1 read a case with no eyewitness. Group 2 had one, but the defence discredited them. And Group 3 had one too, but they were told that the eyewitness had poor vision, that they usually wear glasses and didn't have them with them that day. Then all groups were asked if they thought the defendant was guilty. Look at the difference between Group 1, where there was no eyewitness, compared to Groups 2 and 3. 72%, even though the eyewitness's evidence was called into question, or the eyewitness needed their glasses and didn't have them with them. Okay, so jurors love eyewitnesses. So I mentioned previously about confidence. Well, the correlation between confidence and accuracy is approximately 0.20. So remember, when it goes between 0 and 1, you want to score closer to 1, so 0.8 and above. So 0.2 is a very weak correlation. Correlation usually higher in target present rather than target absent lineups. And we'll talk more about that later on when we get into lineups. Correlation is higher for recall tasks compared to recognition tasks. So recall tasks are things like, can you tell me what happened? Telling a story and recall what happened. Recognition is asking, do you recognise an offender? Which is a closed question. That's only a yes or no. So open-ended questions are going to elicit a higher correlation. Ask the person to just tell their story. But non-confident witnesses should not necessarily be ignored, because if someone is not confident and says they are not 100% certain, they could still have really good information and they could actually be 100% correct, even if they don't feel confident that they have gotten it right. Okay, this is a case of what we call unconscious transference. So Donald Thompson was a prominent researcher whose area of expertise was, funnily enough, eyewitness testimony. And the police came knocking on his door one day to inform him that he was a suspect in a rape case. So what had happened was a woman was attacked and left unconscious in her apartment in Sydney. And the description she gave of the man who did it to her was Donald Thompson. At the time of the rape, he had a watertight alibi, as he was on TV conducting an interview about the fallibility of eyewitness testimony. Police were really quite sceptical when he said he was on TV, but of course they were able to prove his story. So what happened? Well, it turned out that being live TV, the rape victim was watching him on TV just before the rape occurred, and she simply confused him with the rapist. So it was an unconscious transference from the actual rapist to Donald Thompson, who she'd been watching on TV. So memory can play unbelievably strange tricks on us. I want you to watch this video. It's set in a university, and then come back to the slides. Okay, I'm going to assume here that you have now watched this video. How many different variations did the students give? They couldn't even get the offender's height right, or the colour of his clothes, or anything, okay? And these were law students. Did you pick up on the misinformation that the lecturer gave about his nose? She said something about his nose, and that being the only thing that she noticed, and students started to report the only thing they can remember was his nose. Very, very worrying when you think about the fact of how much credence we put on eyewitness testimony. Okay, this is the case study, and we're going to do this in more depth in the tutorial workshop. The victim in this case was Jennifer Thompson Canino. She was only Jennifer Thompson at the time, she wasn't married. And the suspect was Ronald Cotton. He had some convictions for petty theft, but really nothing serious. Convicted in 1985, exonerated in 1995. So the story here is that when Jennifer was being raped, she decided that if she survived, she was going to make sure she could remember as much detail as possible about the man that raped her, so he could be locked up for a very long time. From a lineup, she picked out Ronald Cotton, who served 10 years for her rape. He was finally exonerated on DNA evidence, which proved that Bobby Poole was the actual rapist. Ron and Jennifer now work together, helping other inmates say they've been really wrongly convicted to try and prove their innocence. So they actually travel around America together. They're family friends now, which is really on both their parts. A huge amount of forgiveness goes on there. So later on in one of the next mini lectures, I'm going to actually show you what Bobby looks like in a photo next to Ron. And Bobby actually ended up in the same prison as Ron, and people started to confuse them and call them by each other's names. So you can imagine what's going to happen. Bobby also started bragging in prison that Ronald was serving time for his crime, and he was in prison for rape. Jennifer was called back in when they did the first appeal for Ronald, and she still identified Ronald, even though Bobby Poole was in the courtroom at the time, because her memory was now imprinted with his face, and she couldn't, her memory wouldn't allow her to entertain the fact that it could be this other man. Okay, that ends part one. In part two, we're going to discuss memory and perception and how it can affect what we remember about something that we have seen.